hopefully the video conference will work.
Great. Well, greetings from sunny southern Michigan, where it's 80 degrees today and the palm trees are blowing softly in the breeze coming off of Lake Erie. I'm sorry I'm not there either. Actually, my brother this last weekend lives over in the Sunset, and he was hosting a block party, and I was able to attend that last year, but I didn't make it this year. I've had some interactions with your institution over a number of years. I almost ended up there after getting my PhD, but my wife insisted on moving back to the Midwest. And it seems like every few years I almost end up there again, and I never make it out of Michigan, so I apologize for that. I think what my role is to kind of give you an inside view of what university presidents think of intercollegiate athletics, kind of laying out what I see as some of the issues. I want to talk a little bit about the contrast between myth and reality in several areas. A little bit what to do, but I have to confess that everything I've tried has failed. And so toward the end, I'll give you a sense of what I think might happen. I'm not sure that's the best thing. Maybe I ought to start off by confessing that I have known the sin of big-time college sports. I led 5 teams to the Rose Bowl, 3 Final Fours, 4 Frozen Fours, that's hockey, several national championships, 8 victories over Ohio State, which in Michigan is the most important thing, and a very serious scandal, one of the most serious in recent times with Chris Webber and the Fab Five, our basketball program. So I'll admit that right off the bat. I've been involved off and on with college sports over about 4 decades. I played football in college. As a faculty member, I, like most faculty members in the days when you could afford tickets to Michigan Stadium, I just would go and root for the team. But then when I became provost, I was responsible for the admission of student athletes, learned a lot about that, and then as president. And then finally as the member and chair of the President's Council of the Big Ten Conference, which is its board of directors. That experience has led me at the outset here to 2 or 3 conclusions. First, I should stress that I believe that intercollegiate athletics in most sports are a very valuable experience for students, augmenting their academic studies. In sports like gymnastics and field hockey and soccer and so forth, we frequently find that the academic performance of student athletes is higher than that of our average student. But 2 sports stand apart, football and basketball, which quite frankly today, at least in Division I programs like Berkeley and Michigan, have clearly become commercial entertainment industries. They have little relevance, if any, I believe, to the academic mission of the university. They're based on a culture, a set of values that, while appropriate for show business, can be both highly corrupt and very damaging to the academic mission of universities. The second conclusion, I think you can make a case for the relevance of college sports to the educational mission of universities, but I really can find no compelling reason why American universities should continue to conduct intercollegiate athletic programs at the highly commercialized and professionalized level of big-time football and basketball, simply for the entertainment of the American public and the financial benefit of coaches, athletic directors, conference commissioners, the NCAA, television network sponsors, and sports apparel manufacturers. When we had a new athletic director appointed several years ago, I knew him from other kinds of activities, and I told him, look, there are only 3 reasons why a university would choose to conduct big-time sports at the level of football and basketball today. Because it benefits the student athletes, or because it benefits the university, or because it benefits the larger community. And I think today one can make a good case that Division I football and basketball fail to meet any of these criteria. In fact, I've become increasingly convinced that big-time college sports do a lot more damage to universities, to its students and faculty, its leadership, its reputation, credibility, than most people realize, and indeed that most people will admit that do realize it. I think that in too many cases, these athletic programs exploit young people. They recruit them with the promise of a lucrative professional career or perhaps a college education. And in fact, many players achieve neither. Scandals in intercollegiate athletics seriously damage our institutions. I've been that. I was on the phone today with the head of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and they're about to get an NCAA ruling in the next couple of days, but it's already caused enormous damage to them. Big-time college football and basketball put inappropriate pressures on university governance. Boosters, politicians, the media try to influence both university leadership and governing boards. I think the impact of intercollegiate athletics on university culture and values has been damaging. Inappropriate behavior of athletes and coaches, all too frequently tolerated and excused. We've gone through that over the last several years with the coach that we just had to fire last year. And as I say, I think the commercial culture of the entertainment industry that characterizes college football and basketball today is not only orthogonal to academic values, but it's corrosive and corruptive to the academic enterprise. And so now you'll see why they occasionally throw me out of Michigan Stadium for saying that. I might add that I've been on several recent studies of the future of higher education in this country. The Spellings Commission for the Bush administration. I'm now a member of the National Academy Study of the Future of the American Research University, and some of this writing on the wall behind me is because we've used this as a war room to figure out what our principal recommendations will be. And we have chosen, I think, very wisely to stay as far away from intercollegiate athletics as possible, although we realize that they do cause significant damage. Let me therefore move to some myths and realities about college sports. I think people generally think that college sports probably are not completely self-supporting, although they think that there may be a number of institutions whose football programs generate enough revenue that they are. My own belief is there's not a program in this country that covers its full costs, even those that claim to, whether it's USC or the University of Texas or Ohio State or Michigan or Notre Dame. They all use flaky accounting. They don't include capital expenditures, hidden subsidies, what people doing research would call indirect costs. In fact, the only people that really make money out of these programs are the coaches, the athletic directors, NCAA brass, and the networks, and certainly not student athletes, and certainly not their institutions. The data that was released a couple of weeks ago from the NCAA, of all people, indicate that as of a couple of years ago, the median budget deficits at NCAA institutions is $9,000 a year. $9 million a year. I'm sorry, I come back again. I'll come back to that number in a second. Better yet, the total cost for intercollegiate athletics in 2008, 2009 was $10.5 billion. The total revenues from ticket sales, TV, and licensing was half that, 5.6. So $5 billion had to come from someplace. And at most of our institutions, it comes out of the pockets of students and the tuition they pay, or in the case of those of us with big medical centers, it may come out of some of the clinical fees. Back when I was chair of the Big Ten Conference in the 1990s, we tried to control the growth in expenditures of our sports programs by holding them to the CPI, the inflation rate. We found, however, it was very hard to determine what that increase was because we couldn't trust the numbers we were getting out of athletic departments or athletic directors. So what we did is we had the chief financial officers of each of these institutions actually go over the books very carefully with their auditors. And what we found was not only were all of these programs losing, but some of them, like Northwestern, were losing $10 to $12 million a year. To calibrate that, that's about $1,000 per student for Northwestern to stay in the Big Ten. And they kept it a secret. They didn't want us to release that information. So the bottom line is that these football and basketball do support the other intercollegiate athletic sports, but as an entity, none of them cover their full costs. The second myth, intercollegiate athletics are important for fundraising. Here the reality is, at least from my experience and most of the presidents I talk with, people who give because of winning programs give to winning programs. They don't give to academics. Even worse, some of the tax loopholes that have been put in to the treatment of contributions and expenses in intercollegiate athletics actually benefit and disguise the financial impact they have on the rest of the institution. For example, the current treatment of what are called premium fees, that is, the additional fees you have to give the athletic department in order to get reasonable seats or season tickets. Or, for example, the $85,000 a year it costs you to lease a box at Michigan Stadium. 80% of those payments are considered as tax-deductible, charitable contributions to the educational purpose of the university. And of course, they're nothing of the sort. They're quid pro quo. At Michigan, we have it even worse because in our state, people that give to higher education get a $500 tax credit on their income tax, and so our athletic department just happened to put in a $500 fee in order to get season tickets that people claim as the tax credit, so they don't give the money to the academic programs of the universities. The final thing I'd say, having led one of the largest fundraising campaigns in the history of public higher education, our experience is the largest donors could care less about college sports. They don't want it to embarrass the institution, but that's not why they give to the institution. They give to the institution because the quality of its academic programs. That's the case, I believe, for the leading public institutions and certainly for the leading privates, Yale, Harvard, so forth. They'd never give for athletics. That would not persuade them to give that financing. Capital facilities. Well, this tax gimmick that I just told you about is instrumental in driving much of the large investment in capital facilities, football stadiums, training facilities, academic facilities restricted to athletic students' studies and so forth. But the interesting thing is that although these major facilities, like the renovations of your football stadium, which is going to cost some ungodly amount, is debt finance dependent on the fees that students pay as tuition. You see that the rating agencies in New York don't count the anticipated revenues you might make by ticket sales or television receipts. They only will rate the quality of your debt based on dependable revenues. They no longer incidentally consider state support as dependable, so it's primarily student fees and patient revenue. Michigan, several years ago, spent $300 million to add 3 tiers of skyboxes to Michigan Stadium. And since most of the fees for those skyboxes, as I said, are tax deductible, the real people that are paying for those skyboxes are the people that sit in the rain in the cheap seats because they're paying through the taxes they pay. The NCAA, well, the reality is the NCAA is primarily a promotional organization, very similar to the NFL or the NBA. Its principal job is to maximize the value, the commercial value, the entertainment attractability of the product. That means a level playing field, but it means also, in many cases, to allow the games to become more and more pro-like, more and more violence, and so forth. The concern, of course, of the NCAA, they're roughly $700 million they get a year, is regarded as tax-exempt revenue because of the educational purpose of the universities which they serve. But in reality, it really isn't. When you're paying coaches $4 to $5 million a year, even assistant coaches $1 million a year, there are about a dozen athletic directors that now make that, and most conference commissioners make a couple of million a year. That's off the scale of a not-for-profit. And so they may be in trouble fairly soon, and I'll come back on that in another moment. Another argument, intercollegiate athletics is important for school spirit. I went to Yale and Caltech. Do you think anybody determines school spirit on the basis of the Caltech football team? Actually, they no longer can be in the NCAA, so they have a volunteer football team that allows them to play custodians and faculty along with the students. Intercollegiate athletics winning programs attract students. Well, sure, after Michigan will win a Rose Bowl or a Final Four, we'd see a bump in student applications, but interestingly enough, the quality of our student body didn't improve any. So I kind of question the kinds of students that would be attracted to an institution because of winning programs. I can tell you that T-shirt and sweatshirt sales do increase. I used to measure the popularity of Michigan's commercialism, I'd usually go up to the Bay Area after a Rose Bowl and decompress, and then walking through Golden Gate Park, I'd always count how many Michigan sweatshirts I saw after a Rose Bowl, and I noticed the bump in those few Rose Bowls we actually won. What about scandals? Well, here, as I said earlier, I've seen both sides of it, and they can be very damaging to the reputation of universities, and they are very disappointing to some of our most valuable alumni and supporters. Issues. I think the most serious one is the exploitation of student athletes. Until today, the NCAA had a rule that limited on a year-by-year basis the grants and aid that would support financially students to attend the institution. That means that you could only provide them a year at a time. You had until July 31st of the year preceding the next academic year to decide whether you're going to continue that grant or not to the student. And since those grants were controlled by the coaches, they were clearly dependent upon their athletic performance and not on their academic success. So in my view, that's pay for play. It's a little different than the kind of support you'd provide a graduate teaching assistant or a graduate research assistant. Furthermore, it puts the student athlete at enormous risk. Many coaches had a practice of recruiting more players than they had financial aid to support. And so at midsummer, they'd tell a few players that, well, we don't have enough to support you, and that would destroy the players' opportunity to continue their education. That was changed today, apparently. I just saw in the news headlines this afternoon that the NCAA is now allowing institutions to provide multiple-year financial aid, but my suspicion is that most institutions will claim poverty and will continue the one-year-at-a-time practice. Although I'd note if you took half of the salary of many of our football coaches, that's enough to provide four-year scholarships for most of their teams. This exploitation of student athletes occurs in other ways. It occurs in terms of the health impact, particularly over long term, that they experience. My primary care physician at Michigan, my orthopedic surgeon, is a team physician, and he says that as a rule of thumb, roughly half of the players in Division I-A football, the football bowl group, will suffer injuries requiring some level of surgery. We're now beginning to see more and more what serious head injuries, concussions are. Actually, I have a personal experience because the center on my football team when I played in college by his late 50s had to be institutionalized with dementia. And probably the most famous player at Michigan in the last 30 or 40 years, Ron Johnson, who was All-American and then All-Pro of the New York Giants, has just before the age of 60 been institutionalized with dementia. And in both cases it comes from the damage they experienced, injuries they experienced while playing. Taylor Branch, whose article in The Atlantic I think you've been asked to read, I think put it in a very compelling way when he noted that when the Knight Commission or the NCAA proclaims that scholarship athletes are paid in the most meaningful way possible with a free education, he regards this, quote, "this evasion by prominent educators severed my last reluctant emotional tie with imposed amateurism. I found it worse than self-serving. It echoes masters who once claimed that heavenly salvation would outweigh earthly injustice to slaves." Well, that's kind of a profound statement from someone who won the Pulitzer Prize with his 3-volume history of Martin Luther King. Interestingly enough, we've done surveys of heavily recruited athletes in football and basketball that enter our institution. These are smart kids. We find that by and large they realize the odds of them making it to professional athletics is very remote. Michigan may place 1 or 2 players a year into the pros. And so they initially are coming to the university for education to prepare them for other kinds of careers. And those careers aren't much different than those of our normal students. They want to be successful in business or medicine or law. But the problem is within the first 2 to 3 weeks they go to the first classes, they find out that their academic preparation is considerably below that of our normal students. At Michigan, just like at Berkeley, our normal entering students come in with a 3.9 generally or higher. Furthermore, in these sports, they not only have 40-hour-a-week jobs, but with the coaches watching over their every activity, it's like 50 to 60 hours a week. And they really have full-time occupation that prevents them from exploring their academic interests. So what they choose to do fairly quickly is to major in eligibility. They kind of take the cupcake courses where the coaches point them. Attrition rates are horrible. The NCAA just came out with, they calculate graduation rates over a 6-year period in a somewhat different way than the federal government. Their numbers were somewhat higher, 60, 70% for football, 55 and 65% for basketball and football respectively. That's more than half, but on the other hand, that's typically 25 to 30 points below that of the average student on most of those campuses. So, what to do? Well, kind of the things I've suggested in the past as a university president and afterwards. I believe very strongly in freshman ineligibility for sports, all sports. I believe that all first-year students in all sports, whether they be the commercialized sports or others, should be ineligible for varsity competition. The first year really is a time for students to adjust intellectually and emotionally to the hectic pace of college life, to living away from home, to moving at a different pace with their studies and so forth. Incidentally, when I was chair of the Big Ten Conference tried to move to that standard, and it was apparent that no one else would move with us, and so we had to abandon that. Second, I believe very strongly that the athletic scholarship, which is the name the NCAA coined to protect themselves from charges of pay for play back in the 1970s, or grant and aid, should be replaced with need-based financial aid. In fact, David Hoare yesterday had a long interview with a reporter for the New York Times that is interviewing a number of people to write an article on pay for play. And he believes there are kind of two directions to go here. The one that he prefers and that I also prefer is that when you recruit a student athlete, you make a 4+2 year scholarship commitment to them, and which could be need-based. That is, you will support them for 4 years, and if it takes longer than that to graduate, you'll provide another up to 2 years. The alternative to that, which he supports and I kind of question, is to actually de-amateurize football and basketball, to provide student athletes with some level of compensation, similar to a graduate teaching assistant or the graduate research assistant, perhaps a stipend of some kind, plus of course tuition and so forth, and then perhaps create a fund that after they leave the university, when the program uses their image and marketing and so forth, they'll get some compensation from that. The difficulty with that approach, in contrast to the first one, is that clearly defines students as employees of the university in the same way that a graduate teaching assistant or a graduate research assistant does, and therefore makes them eligible for all of the apparatus that governs employment, whether it be workman's compensation, whether it be the capacity for collective bargaining, which graduate teaching assistants on your campus and my campus have. And of course that scares the death out of the NCAA and the coaches. I think that somehow we need to mainstream the coaches, throttle back salaries of athletic directors, coaches, and staff to levels comparable to faculty and staff. That would require probably an antitrust exemption or courage on the part of university presidents not to hire really expensive coaches. We need to mainstream the administration of intercollegiate athletics. If it's a student extracurricular activity, maybe it should report to the Vice President for Student Affairs. One of my colleagues, Gordon Gee, who was at Ohio State when I was 8-1-1 against Ohio State, he then left, bounced through Brown to Vanderbilt, and then came back to Ohio State several years ago. At Vanderbilt, he actually realigned the reporting relationship of his athletic department to the Vice President for Student Affairs, but he noted that if he'd have done that at Ohio State, he would have been out pumping gas for an employment within a couple of weeks. Needless to say, he did not do that at Ohio State. Financial support, I guess I almost have the Division III Ivy League belief that if intercollegiate athletics are of value to students, they should be subsidized by the general and education budget of the university. I think putting them on the commercial value of football and basketball is one of the things that distorts the system. Faculty control. In the Big Ten, until about 10 years ago, we had a rule that overseeing the athletic department was a faculty board and control with faculty majority. The athletic directors managed to persuade their presidents to change those to advisory boards, which they now chair, and needless to say, have very little influence. I think we need rigorous independent audit and compliance functions, not simply of financial issues, but of compliance with NCAA and conference rules. In fact, I've even suggested at times we need something akin to Sarbanes-Oxley, which, as some of you may know, in financial accounting requires the chief financial officer and the CEO to sign and testify that the audit statements are in fact correct with legal liability if those are found to be false. It would be interesting to require the athletic director, the university president, and the chair of the governing board to sign an affidavit each year that no breach of conference or national rules has occurred. I think we need limits on schedules and student participation. We're already playing ice hockey at Michigan, and we'll start basketball next week. Football is year-round. Somehow we need to get competitive schedules back, preferably to a single academic term. Competitive schedules, football back to 10 games, basketball to 20 games, and constrain competitive and travel schedules to be compatible with academic demands. I don't think the Pac-10 is going to have much fun traveling to Colorado to play, nor do I think the teams in the Big East that have to join the Big 12, Oklahoma and Texas, are going to enjoy that. Throttling back commercialization in my dream world, let's forget about the possibility of national championship football playoffs. I think we'd be better off throttling back the NCAA basketball tournament to a 2-week conference champion-only event, which it used to be, and chase the sports press out of locker rooms and the lives of our students. Of course, those arguments have been launched by many others, and generally the response you get is, hey, look, college football and basketball are the geese that lay the golden eggs, and so, in fact, you really can't touch this. So that really is not a successful approach. Other issues, athletics department staff, including coaches, should be subject to the same conflict of interest policies that apply to other university staff and faculty. If our faculty got out and started hawking Nike shoes or the local car dealer, we'd fire them. Well, we actually encourage that for the athletic department. All personnel searches, including those for coaches, should comply fully with the policies and practices characterizing other staff, including affirmative action. Athletic programs should not be allowed to interfere or undermine academic policies and principles. The admission of student athletes, their academic standing, their eligibility for athletic competition should be controlled by the faculty, we should ban special academic support activities available only to student athletes that further isolate them for the rest of the student body, in the same way that we banned special residence halls for student athletes a number of years ago. Well, this list actually I presented several years ago to the Knight Commission when I was asked to testify. The commission at that time was chaired by Bill Friday, who was president of the University of North Carolina, and Father Ted Hesburgh, who was president of Notre Dame. When I finished my list of suggestions, Father Ted looked at me, crossed himself, and said, "May God have mercy on your soul." But interestingly enough, when they finally came forward with their report, they stated the following. After digesting the extensive testimony offered over a years-long period, the Commission is forced to reiterate its earlier conclusion that at their worst, big-time college athletics appear to have lost their bearings. Athletics continue to threaten to overwhelm the universities in whose names they were established. Indeed, we must report that the threat, and this was in the year 2000, has grown rather than diminished. Higher education must draw together all of its strengths and assets to reassert the primary educational mission of the academy. The message that all parts of the higher education community must proclaim is emphatic. Together we have created today's disgraceful environment in college sports, and only by acting together can we clean it up. So, how do you do it? Well, forget about athletic organizations such as the Pac-10, the NCAA, or the Big Ten, because those are the ones that are driven very much by the profitability of the enterprise for personal gain and visibility. In fact, by approaching those folks and asking them to do something, you're essentially opening the hen house and letting the fox in. So that's hopeless. What about university presidents? Well, for a while I thought that university presidents might come together through a high-level academic organization such as the Association of American Universities. In fact, my model was to kind of negotiate a disarmament treaty between the Big Ten, the Pac-10, and the ACC, which are the three dominant academic groups. If you could negotiate that, you could get the Ivy League to join you, along with MIT and Caltech, and you'd have enough votes within the AAU to essentially pass rules that after, say, a 5-year period, any AAU member that didn't ascribe to the new rules would no longer be a member of AAU. The problem is I couldn't get either the Big Ten or the Pac-10 to go along with any of this. Actually, the chancellors at Stanford and UCLA were quite willing, but not the rest of your institutions. I don't know what happened to Berkeley. I can't comment on that. So university presidents are trapped between a rock and a hard place, between a public demanding high-quality entertainment for the commercial sports industry that big-time football and basketball have become, but by governing boards and sometimes donors who support the programs and actually have the capacity and sometimes the inclination to fire presidents who rock the university boat too strenuously. I always used to say that presidents first have to decide what ditch they're going to fight in and take the chance of being killed in. And most presidents today decide that, look, college athletics is not one of the ditches that I want to die in, that I want to step on in the minefield. So they treat it with benign neglect. What about the faculty? Well, in the end, it's the governing faculty that's responsible for the academic integrity of the university. They've been given the ultimate protection, tenure, to enable them to confront the forces of darkness that savage academic values from the athletic department. A number of faculty senates have tried to grapple with this, including some leadership from the Pac-10, but it's very, very hard. As I say, their real control over the athletic department has pretty much been removed. I don't know how it is at Berkeley, but at Michigan, most of our faculty can no longer afford to go to attend games. To attend a game at the University of Michigan Stadium now costs you about $150 a game for a seat, when you count the seat tax. So they generally treat it with benign neglect. They're not a part of it. They don't have any influence, and they sit back and let it happen. What about trustees? Well, I mean, the faculties could challenge the trustees of our university, who in the end must be held accountable for the integrity of the institution. Actually, most university trustees are dedicated volunteers with deep commitments to the institution, but there are always a few that are on the board to support the athletic program of the football coach. And so that has not been a successful way to approach it. What about a build-up in public frustrations? I mean, we have a good example right now with the conference meltdowns, which I believe are engineered by the commissioners of the major conferences that are trying to build 4 super conferences with 16 programs in each, so that the big 64 can withdraw from the NCAA and not have to deal with them anymore. This is the outfit that's pushing for championship playoffs. You know, the public appetite for this is very, very strong, and I do believe that it's the public demand for an increasing level of violence that wants entertainment every night of the week that's much of the problem. Intercollegiate athletics, to some degree, is really the opiate of the masses right now. What about government? Well, I finally gave up and a number of years ago decided maybe that was the way to do it, and I actually agreed to testify before the Senate Finance Committee chaired by Senator Grassley. who was taking on the tax treatment of not-for-profit entities. In fact, he attacked the payment of the presidents of not-for-profit foundations and medical centers and so forth. Unfortunately, the Democrats took over the Senate before Senator Grassley was able to get anything done. We were trying to get them to change this tax policy, which so underwrites the excessive behavior of college sports today. So I don't see there's a lot of appetite for that. So what's left? Unfortunately, the only real agent of change I can see left right now is litigation, which I hate to say, but I think that may be it. And it could occur on two fronts. As you know by reading the Atlantic article by Taylor Ranch or perhaps by other discussions, there are several cases underway working their way through the courts trying to use the argument that the current practice of providing financial aid for student athletes a year at a time and controlled by the coaches is in fact pay for play. Very little different from that would be provided to graduate student assistants, and therefore that would be ruled as employment. I can assure you the NCAA is terrified they're going to lose their tax-exempt status or be hit with endless antitrust suits over this. They have bought their way out of settlement for some of these cases, but the ones working their way through right now, actually the plaintiffs have very high-quality law firms behind them, and I think they're going to win some of those. I noticed that within the last 2 or 3 weeks, Bill Russell, who's perhaps the most famous basketball player of my time, has sued for the use of his image by the NCAA and the University of San Francisco long after he played for them. So that's one possibility. The other one that I think is even more serious has to do with student health issues. I think we're only beginning to learn just how damaging to long-term health this highly violent level of these commercial entertainment activities has become. Anytime you see college football players come back for a reunion in their 40s and 50s, they're kind of like the walking wounded. They're already having knee and hip replacements. There was a study done of the NFL several years ago that pointed out that the life expectancy of today's NFL players is only 57, which is kind of alarming because of the physical stress they're under. And my suspicion is that of today's college football players, you would find that activity significantly shortens their lives. The new information we're beginning to get on brain injuries and concussions, not only from these highly violent collisions you see out in the middle of the field where people have concussions, but the day-in practice activities which are putting unusual stresses on the developing brain of young people, I think gives rise to the possibility that you're going to see more and more class action suits for failing to protect college athletes from long-term disabilities, early dementia onset, and so forth. The outcome of that would not only put enormous financial stress on universities, it could put violent sports such as football completely out of business, but we'll kind of leave that open. The bottom line here is that you have to ask the question of who's protecting the interests of student athletes. It's clearly not the coaches or NCAA. They have a serious conflict of interest. They make money off of them. The faculty have largely been pushed to the side. University leaders like presidents or trustees have abdicated their responsibilities. As I say, they treat it with benign neglect. Government was the one that got us into this trouble in part by putting these tax loopholes in that fund the beast. I doubt if they can get us out of trouble, and so maybe lawyers are the only protection left. Now let me give you a final idea before I conclude, and actually that was why this New York Times reporter called me. Several years ago I had the opportunity to give the opening address to the presidents of all of the major European universities in Barcelona. That's the European University Association. And one of our sessions was on the new campus of the University of Barcelona, right across the street from the largest stadium in Europe, Estadio Camp. Next to that was the largest basketball arena in Europe. There was a world-class hockey arena and facilities for Olympic sports, and none of those had anything at all to do with the University of Barcelona. That was, of course, FC Barcelona, the Barcelona football club that recently won the World Cup. They generate about 600 million euros a year in revenues from their activities, and they are a corporation. They have 150,000 members of their football club. You buy into it, you own shares in it, pass them on to your descendants and so forth. So my idea is as follows. Maybe you can use greed to actually transform college sports, at least the commercial part of it. After all, the Michigan Wolverines only make about 100 million a year. Even Texas only makes about 140 million a year. So the 600 to 700 million a year that FC Barcelona or Real Madrid or some of the other major European programs make, clearly puts us in the chump change mode. So why don't we offer to our athletic programs to give them an IPO, to spin them off as for-profit entities. We'll license them the name of Michigan Wolverines. We'll rent our stadium to them. We'll remove all constraints on who they play as players, the best they can find and buy. We won't require them to be students. And we'll go back and kind of recreate college football and basketball in the Division III mode. I actually made this suggestion to a number of sports writers after I got back from Barcelona. They thought I'd been drinking too much. But in a sense, that's kind of the direction we're headed already. So my concluding remarks, I believe, and this stuff on the blackboard, or whiteboard, I don't think you can read, is part of the analysis we have of the state of the American Research University, and particularly of the public research university, like the University of California. We're in an era of enormous challenge and change. And right now, I think the damage that's being done to our institutions during this period of great change and challenge by the big-time commercial entertainment industry that we've allowed to develop for college football and basketball is just too much for us to experience. As I said at the beginning, it's my belief there's very little justification for the American university to mount and sustain big-time football and basketball at its current commercial and professional level. The damage to academic values, integrity, and public perception is simply too great. And in conclusion, the American university is simply too important to the future of this nation to be threatened by the ever-increasing commercialization, professionalization, and corruption of college sports. Now, as I end, I will quote from Thomas Paine's Common Sense, a paragraph that I've frequently been told when I was president. Perhaps the sentiments contained in these pages are not yet sufficiently fashionable to procure them general favor. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right and raises at first a formidable outcry in the defense of custom. But the tumult soon subsides. Time makes more converts than reason. And I think that's what you're going to see over the next several years. But it's not going to come from within the academy or within our athletic programs. It's going to come from beyond. And unfortunately, I think it's going to come from the legal profession. Okay, well, we've got about 5 minutes left for questions, and I'm happy to answer whatever you might ask.
Are you hearing us okay?
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Questions?
Hi, first of all, thank you for speaking to us. It's a really good opportunity to hear you actually speaking to us, because we're reading your book and everything. But my question is, you just closed with, you're thinking that the change that's going to happen within the next few years is going to come from the legal system?
Through litigation.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, what can students do about it?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think the most important thing that students and faculty can do right now is somehow make it apparent to university leadership, particularly your regents, that they in the end have a fiduciary responsibility for the welfare of your institution, and this is a serious threat and could seriously damage it. I think most trustees really don't pay enough attention to this, and in the end, I think they should be held accountable. And I think students and faculties are the ones to do that. Quite frankly, you don't have, if in fact pay for play would be actually ruled by the courts, then in fact student athletes could always create unions and do what graduate teaching assistants do and strike from time to time. I wish faculty still had executive authority over intercollegiate athletics as they did for over a century in the Big Ten, but they don't anymore. So without that direct authority or influence, I think you really have to point your concerns through publications, through meetings and so forth, at your regents. You know, they're the ones that set the real policies, and in the end, they're the ones that have to be accountable for any damage that these activities cause your institution.
Thank you.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to pursue the question a little bit farther because are we expected to wait until legal action is taken? I mean, our Professor Barsky here has written plenty of op-eds, and I mean, we've voiced our opinions. Faculty prefers that they have some sort of voice in athletic departments, and nothing's been done. Are we supposed to wait until beyond?
Absolutely not. The students at Berkeley are no different than those at Michigan. In fact, I always used to think that there were a group of very strong students that kind of would winter at Columbia, summer at Berkeley, and then they'd pass through Ann Arbor in fall and spring as they go back and forth. My experience at Michigan is that students are a very powerful force for change, making their concerns known, hopefully in peaceful ways, but as president, it was back in the days when I used to have students take over my office, and one time I had them dig graves in the front yard of the president's house to bury student rights. So there are a lot of ways students can get attention, and they should do that. I think the other issue that clearly faces the University of California as it does Michigan, you're entering a very difficult financial period. You've lost about half of your state support. You're almost down to the level of state support per student that we have at Michigan. But, and therefore, every dollar is extremely important to the academic core of the institution and should not be used to subsidize a commercial enterprise, primarily to fund high salaries for coaches and athletic directors or to entertain sports-loving fans. So you have every right to be heard, and that your voice should be loud, and it should be, you know, I mean, you've already been doing it, and you should continue and intensify that. You shouldn't try. You can look to the future and say, look at the damage that would be caused if there was litigation and Berkeley had a $100 million judgment against them, or in fact, you know, a serious scandal and damaging their reputation. But you can't wait for that. You've got to point out those dangers and ask people that are in leadership positions or governance positions, make it clear that it's their responsibility to do something about it.
Thank you.
So, thanks again as well. I also was pretty curious about, so it's really surprising to me how the regions are kind of failing in their accountability in the sense that they approved the almost $1 billion investment into the stadium that's in a very dangerous place. So would it require like a broad-based kind of a grassroots organization or campaign for the broader public and the broader students to actually spend time and be educated about this subject in order to bring the regions more into a accountable.
I think that, I mean, that clearly is the way that you get action on most of these things. You folks are in a somewhat more awkward position because your regents are appointed for, 12-year single terms. And in Michigan, we elect our regents, and they have to stand for election. So we can get even with them if they don't go in the right direction. What you have to do is exert pressures on them in other ways. It can be through political methods, through the governor that appoints them and so forth. But in the end, they're the ones that really have the responsibility for this. And when we ran the numbers on the $300 million that were invested in Michigan Stadium skyboxes, we did not believe they would generate enough revenue from those skyboxes to pay for them. It'd be very interesting to see the real numbers on I mean, it's true that I'm sure the Berkeley Stadium has debt at very low rates, but the point is you still have to pay back the full cost of that stadium. And so the interesting question is, where is that going to come from? And I think it's your institution as well as theirs. You have a right to know that. So those things should be challenged and should be questioned. At a time in Ann Arbor right now, we have very little construction of academic facilities, and we're spending about $1 billion right now on athletic facilities. They claim they come from other sources, but as I say, I think all athletic programs in this country are subsidized in one way or another by the same dollars that you pay as tuition and the same dollars that go into the quality of your education. And that's a point you've got to make.
Thank you very much. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Jim. That's been an amazing synopsis. You covered so much ground in that time. We really want to thank you so much, and thank you for doing it over the video conference. Thank you so much.
Quite all right. I